Hello, Irina. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for bringing me here.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm very excited to be here with you.
Uh, it's my player. It's my player. And let me tell my friends who are watching us today that Irina is from USA. She born in Ukraine. She is an entrepreneur working with the cybersecurity things as a business, and she is an expert on political affairs. She is an expert on many things, many things. Irina, would you like to share your background with us a little, and then we will start the conversation?
So the company I'm working for now, it does deal with cybersecurity, but it also deals with other forms of security and media as well. It's called Timberwolf Phoenix. My own background is I'm a lawyer. My specialty is in human rights, and I'm also an analyst in national security and geopolitical issues, primarily focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region. But being born in Ukraine makes me kind of naturally acquainted with that part of the world, Russia, Ukraine, former Soviet Union republics. Currently, a lot of my work is focused on South Caucasus region, Azerbaijan, and its relations with its neighbors. Um, and I've done a great deal of writing as well as legal work. I work with also various peace building efforts and I also advise organizations focused on justice, security, peace building, such as the International Justice Organization based in London. I speak. I'm a spokesperson for the Gulf Israel Human Rights Forum. Um, I'm involved with a Moroccan community organization called Moroccan Americans in New York. Um, my partner Sima Alasawi and I have done a great deal of bridge building between the American Jewish community and the Moroccan community, and we've also organized cultural events to introduce Moroccan culture to the New York scene. I've written on the start affair. In addition to geopolitical issues, I've discussed these cultural attachment issues a great deal. So I dabble in a lot of different things, but
Oh, that's great. That's
they're
great.
all very professional in nature.
And by the way, there are two very interesting things. One, that you have bridged the Moroccan community and the Jewish community, and I can say that you claim the credit of normalization between Israel and Morocco now.
No, that credit goes entirely to the King Mohammed VI, and of course, the Israeli government and the U.S. government were
Mm,
instrumental likewise. But that was something that I was advocating and pushing for, along with my friends like Simo and my other friend Anissa Opani. We've been pushing this idea in our writings. We've been hoping that at least it will gain support among people who were previously reluctant to consider
mm,
this idea. There's been decades of, unfortunately, false information
mm,
going back and forth, and it wasn't just in Morocco. In Israel, there was a lot of reluctance among many people to engage with, in terms of people-to-people relations, to engage directly. There were ongoing efforts. There were people traveling to Morocco a lot, people of Moroccan descent who retained their citizenships, but others they just didn't necessarily know a lot about the country. So we
mm.
were kind of hoping that bringing the idea of the two countries working together more directly would create stronger bridges among the people as well. And I'm very glad to see that it's slowly starting to happen.
That's great. That's great. And before going on the topic, Iran and U.S. policies for Iran, and there are so many recent developments after the elections, and there are many developments are going to take place in coming days. But I would like to crack a joke about the situation which you might face. A cybersecurity expert from Ukraine living in USA. Are you the same person whom US blamed for rigging in elections?
It's funny. I wouldn't call myself a cybersecurity expert, although I've written a fair amount on issues involving cybersecurity, hacking, information warfare. But actually, no, that bypassed me because that was actually mostly blamed on the Russian hackers being from Ukraine. I was a little bit protected from that angle of things, but I did follow the political side of the issue a lot,
Hmm.
and actually, I was one of the earlier voices who called into question the entire paradigm of how that came to be. Not that I didn't think that the Russians were meddling actively in the elections, they were and have always been, but the majority of that work has been done for them by the polarization inside the United States, which is concerning. Whenever another country tries to intervene in somebody's affairs, the biggest issue for them is whether or not there is something to exploit. What vulnerability, social vulnerability, is there? And it's much easier when there is a lack of social cohesion than when the country is stable, when everything is clear, and the only thing you have to exploit are technical issues. Technical issues are always the easy part. The difficult part is the hearts and minds of the population, and that's the part that Russians or other countries that have actually taken part in that since then, China, Iran, um, that they're looking to exploit the social aspect even more than the technical aspect. Always the human factor is the biggest issue in security, not the technical aspect, because you can always invent some new method of protection and then somebody else will find a new vulnerability and it's always a race. But exploiting human minds, that's always the biggest problem.
Hmm. That's right. So, Amina, what do you think about? We are like today. I was reading a statement by Khamenei, the leader of Irani regime. They were pushing U.S. administration to go back to those agreements which were there in Obama's time, and President Trump just overruled every agreement and imposed sanctions on Iran. And now they are pushing America to go back to those agreements again. What do you think? Do you think that Biden administration will go for, because Biden was a very vibrant part of Obama administration as the vice president, and now the whole team which was there with the President Obama is back in presidential office again, and but the world is changed, the region is changed. Abrahamic Accord took place. There is new. There are so many new bonds, and there are so many new allies and alliances are taken place in the region. So, do you really think that Biden administration can go back for those agreements?
Well, let's start with the fact that JCPOA, the nuclear deal as everyone calls it, was never an actual agreement. Nothing was signed by either party. It was a policy. It was a policy of engagement by the United States. It was an agreement by the US government, by the way, which was never approved by Congress either, so you can't call it a treaty, you can't even call it an internal agreement. It was an executive policy to
Hmm.
lift sanctions in exchange for an expectation of nuclear work freeze, which, as we know from various organizations and nuclear watchdogs since then, was not abided by Iran. So essentially, it was a U.S. policy concerning U.S. Method of dealing with Iran. And of course, it can change at any point by any president, as any foreign policy can.
Hmm.
What we cannot call it is either a treaty or an agreement because there is no signature on any specific document by either party. So that's not an accurate way of describing. So what Khamenei is calling for is essentially a unilateral US return to the policies of the Obama administration without necessarily acquiescing to what was asked by Obama even at the time, which was a bilateral agreement. Now, you could say that due to the changes since then, at this point, Congress would probably insist on a treaty level agreement if that same set of circumstances is to be observed. But Congress now is in Democrat hands.
Hmm.
They primarily agree with the Biden administration on most major issues. They certainly are not going to cause problems. So if Biden were to return to the same set of circumstances unilaterally again, there would be no necessarily a strong objection by Congress to insist on a treaty level agreement. Now, with respect, much as Republicans and others might not agree with that approach, there is nothing really legally stopping them from doing that. It might be a little bit more difficult because the level of secrecy that surrounded the initial talks is not really being observed even now. It's a fairly open process and it's fairly obvious what's going on. And the Biden administration also has made no secret of wanting to engage with Iran. But I don't believe there would be a significant political or legal obstacle for them to do that. Now, with respect to whether they actually want to go to exactly the same terms as previously, probably not. Not because uh, even the administration, through Secretary Blinken, has made it clear that they would wish some level of nuclear related promises being observed before lifting all of the sanctions. That said, they did promise and they started doing a great deal of very much unilateral action, such as the promise to lift the oil sanctions without predicating it on any steps by Iran first. They have already expressed their unilateral desire to lift the FTO designation from Ansar Allah, the Houthi forces, the Houthi militia in Yemen, which is considered to be a very close Iran proxy. They have already frozen a number of defense agreements aimed at Saudi Arabia and UAE, despite the Abraham Accords. Some people view it as an attempt to roll back Abraham Accords, even though the statements from the administration said that they are happy to build on them. But the signal from the United States as a party to these agreements is that the US considers the issues related to Iran is of paramount priority. And if the expectation from those Arab states was that there would be that these agreements that were made during the Trump administration would be observed as a predicate for the U.S. portion of the agreement of Abraham Accords, they're showing reluctance to continue with that, and I think it is fair for some people to interpret it as a potential rollback of the agreements, at least on part of the U.S. That doesn't mean that the relationship with Israel is going to be broken, but the relationship with the United States on the part of the parties in those agreements, that may suffer as a result of reprioritization of the return to some form of discussion with Iran.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. And this is very interesting part that there was no agreement at all, and there was no agreement was passed by Congress, and this was just an arrangement. We can call it arrangement or just an understanding kind of thing.
I would say it's not even an arrangement because even an arrangement requires a sort of mutual understanding. It's
Hmm.
unclear what the United States has actually gotten from that policy because, as we have have said earlier, Iran did not really abide by the nuclear agreement. It continued building nuclear facilities in different parts of the country. It continued enriching uranium illicitly. So, in terms of what the U.S. Was hoping to achieve, which was to slow down the progress related to Iran's um, nuclear work specifically, that has never been fully accomplished. And with respect to many other issues that were not negotiated as part of that agreement, There too, no progress has been made at all.
Hmm. And there are countries now, like we have witnessed strong reservations from United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. KSA is always against this kind of settlement or the agreement, and now they are engaged with the war in Yemen, which is supposedly backed by Iranian regime.
It's not an issue of supposedly. It's very clearly and well documented to be backed by the Iranian regime. And Iran's involvement predates the civil war in Yemen, which started in 2015. The Houthis that are a particular, it's as they originated as a Zaydi sect of Shia
Hmm.
Islam in Yemen. They do not represent the majority of Shia Muslims in Yemen. Um, they have had relations with Iran going back to the 1990s, long before the civil war or even the instant players in Saudi Arabia or the United States or anywhere else.
Hmm.
That relationship has been growing. Um, Eventually, elements of Hezbollah and IRGC found themselves directly on the ground in Yemen, training this Houthi faction,
Hmm.
which has a particular set of ideological beliefs very close to Khomeinism, and that has been affected by Khomeinist political doctrine that has little to do with any religious form of Islam. It's a political influence that has emerged around the time of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. They also espouse their own set of beliefs that has been at certain times of history in Yemen prevalent in Yemen, but not always, which essentially um, makes them believe that they are direct descendants from Muhammad's tribe, and therefore they're entitled to political power. This dogma is something that has been imposed on the territories that they control and has resulted in discriminatory treatment of various tribes and families who live there. Um, Ironically, the Houthis have their roots not in the Arab states um, where similar beliefs at times have been propagated, but in Iran. They
Hmm.
are originally Persian.
Hmm.
So it's quite ironic that Iran is using this Arabized sect to
Hmm.
propagate, an idea that would disrupt the political order in Arab societies,
Hmm.
which are generally not governed by this idea of linking descent to Muhammad's tribe to political power. But
Hmm.
that's what we're seeing happening. So Iran has absolutely backed that effort. It backed that ideology. It has funded the Houthis directly with very sophisticated weapons that they could not produce on their own. The United Nations acknowledged as much. These missiles and drones have been demonstrated by the United States and the Arab coalition in front of the international community at
Hmm.
the UN. The funding has from Hezbollah and from Iran has been traced, and the
Hmm.
meetings between Houthi leadership and Iranian leadership in Iran and elsewhere have also been directly recorded. Furthermore, after fairly recently, the Iranian ambassador made his way into Sana'a through a third country, it became fairly obvious that it's the Iran and not even the Houthi leadership themselves that are
Hmm.
calling the shots in the political governance of the country. We also know that a lot of the humanitarian aid donated by Saudi Arabia, by the US, by other countries has made itself out of the country, and part of it was just used to enrich the Houthis. Part of it has been used to for terrorism, but part of the financial aid that ended up
Hmm.
there went to Hezbollah for fundraising. The Houthis were actually helping Hezbollah fundraise, and Hezbollah is fundraising for the Iranian regime. So there is a very clear, direct connection. One can no longer claim that Iran's involvement in Yemen is incidental, or that it's even a matter of civil war against the Saudis, because this predates Saudi involvement, which started directly in 2015.
Hmm. Hmm. That's right. And Iran is a big player in Syria as well. And
Uh,
now, like that's so complex region, the Middle East. If you go and watch the situation in Syria, Iraq, then Yemen, then like every single country is involved in multiple uh, levels in different wars. Covert wars are going on there. Hezbollah. Mhm. So, and Iran is very active role there. Iran is a very active player in that whole scenario, which is there in place in Middle East.
I would say that all of these wars are linked together. They're not separate wars, even though they have separate independent elements and different groups of people join them for various reasons of their own. From Iran's standpoint, all of that is actually just a part of the original idea, communist idea of exporting the Islamic Revolution abroad, which was their mandate, which is how the country started out. In the initial years following the Islamic Revolution, Iran was not able to do that successfully because the country was weak. It had just come out of a confrontation um, with out of clashes, out of a coup inside the country, the revolution. Then it was then the Iran-Iraq war took a significant financial toll. For a number of years, Iran was not able to export this revolution ideologically successfully abroad. It tried to, but it was resulted in relatively minor skirmishes and resulted in the creation of the GCC. For those who don't recall, GCC was created in the 1980s as a direct response to the perception of an Iranian threat in the region.
Hmm.
However, really, all of this activity started taking off in the 1990s when Hezbollah became a force to reckon with. It it came from a limited militia that received its support, and initially its goal was to throw Israel out of Lebanon, to a really semi-professional military that engaged with Iran very, very directly, became completely linked to its interests, and started fundraising to a variety of criminal schemes in Africa, especially through the diamond industry, through abductions of and attacks through on Israelis in Africa and on Saudi diplomats and others, abductions, various drug-related schemes, narcotics were trafficked to from Latin America, the involvement of the Lebanese communities in different parts of Africa for various schemes. All of that made this success much more financially stolid. And of course, after the implementation of GCPOA, or that policy by the United States, the lifting of the sanctions, that were very heavy sanctions that were initially imposed under George W. Bush and then Obama, and curtailed a lot of Iran's financial activity and ability to maneuver in the region, that all came back in full force. And by the time the Obama era hit, Iran was fully prepared to push inside Arab states in the so-called Shia Crescent. We have seen it taking advantage of the Arab Spring in Bahrain. They were openly pro-Hezbollah forces engaged on the streets in violent clashes with the police. They did not hide their affiliation with Iran's backing. We know that in eastern Saudi Arabia, Iran has been trying to initially build on grievances by the Shia community. Later, when those issues were increasingly addressed by the Saudi government, they still continued making roadways in other ways through financial incentives and financial rather than religious grievances. But they never fully stopped, and the more the more they were allowed to play a central role, and the more they were treated by the Obama administration as a significant regional power, the more they acted like it. So that gave them an opportunity um, to exploit a sort of perception by various countries that Iran can and should be playing that role, and they did that in a destructive way by bringing in militias and arming militias and financially intervening in Iraq, in Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Eastern Saudi Arabia, that no one, though no one likes to admit that out loud, and other areas as well, Africa, everywhere.
And there are reports about Iran's close ties with Taliban's in Afghanistan now.
Yes, in fact, even though Taliban is a Sunni affiliated group, after Saudi Arabia has decided to disengage from them and to back the Afghani government, Iran essentially took over that role along with a number of other states, including Russia, and funded Taliban directly. And they've come to an arrangement that's mutually satisfactory, even though they don't share all values or goals. Um, it's essentially for Iran an opportunity to remain in control, to affect the process. Most recently, they offered to mediate between Taliban and the United States.
Mm,
Having seen that the talks in Doha have
mm,
stalled, they made this step that I personally think is meant to send a signal to the Biden administration and to
mm,
those who support a potential rapprochement with Iran, that Iran is not just a troublemaking regime, but that it's a normal state that is willing to work with the U.S. on issues of mutual concern, that it's a mediator, that it can play the role of a diplomat, of a party that is working to resolve the conflicts and not just cause them. That's kind of a propaganda message that is being
mm.
sent to the relevant parties here, and that's supposed to um, send a message to the Americans tired of the war in Afghanistan. Look, you guys don't need to worry about this. We have an interest in stability. We can keep Taliban in check. Yes, they're our allies, but that's why we can influence them. So you don't have to worry. You can withdraw. We'll take over. It'll be fine. That's the message here.
That will be an interesting scene to watch Iranians mediating the talks between US administration and Taliban inside Tehran. That will be a wonderful video to watch, by the way.
Well, that would certainly be interesting. I'm not sure that even Biden is going to go as far as to actually send American diplomats to Tehran. Whether he will completely reject that overture, I'm not certain either. I think Biden, similarly to Trump, does not wish to continue with Afghanistan, but he has not taken any proactive steps to engage with other powers in the region on that issue either. He seems to just want to leave.
Mm.
So, given that situation, at the very least, I expect him to play a passive role and allowing Iran to play that role without interfering. Whether he will actively engage with Iran on that issue on a diplomatic level remains to be seen. But we have seen in the past, under the Obama administration, that the U.S. intelligence and drug enforcement administration have engaged with Iran on issues involving ISIS and drug trafficking.
Mm.
Now, one can say that all of that was ironic given Hezbollah's role in drug trafficking and Iran's backing of it, and Obama's infamous shutdown of programs that were that were basically breaking down Hezbollah's role in the international drug trafficking. But nevertheless, it happened. That sort of engagement, whatever you may think of it, it did occur. So I wouldn't be surprised if Biden did return to that policy as well.
That's right. That's right. So, what is the future then? How you see the future of this region with the new administration? How will they tackle Afghanistan, by the way? What are like the Trump had uh, the clear vision. He was not a politician, by the way, but he had the clear vision. Okay, I don't need to fight. I will not fight. I need to withdraw my troops. I will withdraw my troops. I am putting the sanctions. I am putting the sanctions. So he was like a businessman. He knew how to put the financial pressures on someone or on some country or any country. But this administration is experienced. They are senior politicians. They are. It's hard to gauge now. How will they handle with the new region, because it's completely a new region now?
Uh, you hit the nail on the head. Trump, whatever you may think of his policies, did have a clear vision of what he wanted to accomplish and how he saw things playing out. Not all of it came to pass exactly the way he expected for various reasons, including the implementation of his own ideas that could be criticized. But he did have a clear understanding of where he wanted, of the direction in which he wanted things going. Despite this administration's strong signals of where they're going, I don't think they necessarily have an understanding or vision of where it will actually bring them. They want to engage with Iran. They believe that that will be advantageous to stability in the region, but they don't necessarily have a vision of how to achieve that exactly. They think that if they do unilateral goodwill gestures, that then Iran will reciprocate. Nothing in the history of Iran's engagement with the United States or any other country shows that that is how Iran has ever operated on any level.
Hmm.
Uh, on the contrary, it was actually the pressure of the sanctions under Bush in the first years of Obama that brought Iran to any level of outreach to the United States. Now they are putting pressure on Saudi Arabia, claiming that this will bring about a peace deal in Yemen, without explaining how exactly that's supposed to happen, given the number of other factors involved, including Iran's active backing of the Houthis, including the fact that the war in Yemen is not between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but jointly the Yemeni internationally recognized government, the Arab coalition, against the Iran-backed Houthis. Saudi Arabia is not fighting Yemen. They've been invited to join, and that is the issue that I don't necessarily know that the administration is processing, and even if they are not able to articulate what they want into concrete steps that could lead to that outcome. They're taking random steps that they think will make Iran satisfied, but they're not showing how that would actually lead to policies that will lead to some sort of a vision and that will stop Iranian aggression, for instance. They're trying to play more equivalencies. Well, Saudi Arabia and Iran are mutually, they have this rivalry in the region, but in reality, it's only Iran that has significant military presence in through proxies or otherwise in various Arab states, not Saudi Arabia. So, despite the fact that there is, of course, a political, economic, and other rivalries, there's not a real equivalency in terms of results, in terms of the type of action that would necessitate U.S. involvement. So, they're taking steps that are not seen by anyone in the region as anything other than simply steps that are anti-Saudi, anti-Emirati, but not necessarily helpful to curtailing Iranian aggression, or even, for that matter, necessarily pleasing to Iran. Maybe Iran is pleased, maybe it isn't. It certainly benefits Iran, but it's not something that Iran has specifically asked for. This is the U.S. acting unilaterally.
Hmm.
So that's where I feel like the administration's vision is somewhat muddled here. It has not engaged in the level of diplomacy that with any of the parties according to its own multilateralist approach that would lead us to believe it has a concrete path to follow. It hasn't engaged with all the actors to discover a pathway that would be mutually agreed upon and that would lead to a coordinated approach. There's no coordination with anyone. It's all unilateral, quite ironically, for all the administration's claims of adherence to multilateralism. It's not acting in a multilateral manner. So the
That's
messages we're seeing are very mixed. They're mixed towards Iran, they're mixed towards the Arab states, they're mixed towards Israel, they're mixed even towards the American base in the United States. It's acting very multilaterally in some ways by rejoining all these international organizations, but on the other hand, the US is not engaging with other countries in creating a concrete response towards any pathway.
that's right. And where is ISIS stands now? Like now, they have a strong base in Afghanistan right now. And in the past, we have seen that America, USA, and Iran were jointly fighting with ISIS inside Iraq. So, do you think that ISIS will be a factor to bring these two players together or closer in Afghanistan?
I don't believe that would be the case because, to be honest with you, even the first time around, when that happened, it was a mistake from a bigger vantage point. It did not actually solve the ISIS problem. Actually, most of the ISIS problem in Iraq was thanks to the engagement with the Kurdish forces in Iraq, not with the Iranians. It actually brought the Iranian militias into Iraq and even gave them even more credibility that ultimately created a great deal of dissatisfaction with all of the Iraqis, including Shia Iraqis that were initially engaged with Iran very closely for ideological reasons. Even they eventually came to be extremely dissatisfied with those Iran backed forces to
Hmm.
the extent that they've had direct clashes, people were killed. The US took no strong position to defend those Shia Iraqis, and Iran has used its supposed fight against ISIS to actually consolidate power in Iraq in a way that was not healthy for anybody, in a way that the Iraqi government came to, or some portions of it came to resent, that the Iraqi people definitely came to resent, whatever their background. That has not led to any better results. And ISIS is actually coming back in various parts of the world, including we've seen over the last few years increased attacks in Iraq
Hmm.
by ISIS, not so much against U.S. forces directly, but against regular Iraqis of different backgrounds. So I don't believe that that engagement is anything but an excuse for Iran to consolidate power in whatever area it's operating. And I believe that it would be the Afghani forces in Afghanistan that would be doing most of the fighting, whereas the Iranian forces would be doing most of the consolidation of power for themselves entirely in an entirely self-serving way, as we have seen happen in Iraq.
Hmm. That's right. That's very true. Thank you. Thank you, Irina, for your time and for your inputs. And I hope to see you very soon in our next session. We would love to talk to you on different issues. We I personally enjoyed this session, this podcast, and I am really thankful that you have given us time, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon. Hope to see you soon.